So let it be written. So let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. You're a game master who wants to know how to improvise better. Jeff, what do I do? What are some tips?
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what necessarily goes into improvisation, in terms of a lot of people kind of view it as this like very almost like mystical process that, that these people who have like trained in this like secret art of improv, that they're kind of channeling this extra power that you don't have access to, or that they're going into some strange mode where they kind of are pulling all these things out of nowhere. And it's a big misconception about improvisation, that it's kind of this very specific skill that only certain people have and can develop. Because the first thing is that you already improvise basically all the time in your normal day-to-day life. When you talk to other people, you just obviously, presumably you don't have a script that you're working off of when you're talking to them. You just kind of find a right way to kind of go in between responding to their words, coming up with your own words, and kind of going back. Whenever you make decisions about, where you're going to eat, what you're going to do after work or whatever, all these things you're making up kind of in the moment, you're deciding on as you go. And that is improvisation. There's no difference between improvisation that you do in your normal day-to-day life and improvising in a tabletop game. It's just the context that's a little bit different, which kind of brings me into my second point, which is the more that you can understand the vocabulary that goes into a normal tabletop game and familiarize yourself with it, the more that you can start to use it at your own leisure and at your whim. So just how if you were improvising a conversation with a close friend about a topic that you know very well, you probably won't have to think too hard about what you're going to say or what you want to bring up. It's just like, if there's an awesome scene in a movie that you watch, it's like, oh, did you see that scene? Wasn't that so cool? Like, you can talk about those things because you know them very well. You're very intimately aware of like the finer details of it, and you have somebody who can respond well to it, and that can kind of guide a lot of your interactions. So if you can kind of take that same familiarity and apply it to tabletop games and really kind of get a hold of ahead of time the sort of feeling and vocabulary you want to use in your games, that can go a long way towards allowing that to be naturally dropped in the game. So kind of thinking about if you're going to be in a certain region in your world, thinking of different sensory information that you might use to describe certain areas, what places might look like, what places might sound or smell like, what people might be around and what they would be doing. And you don't have to find any specific details or write out a script block or anything to read. But if you can kind of think of those things and kind of pick words that you like or people and a sort of vibe that you're going for, it's so much easier then to just drop those in naturally in the game world because you're familiar with it in the same way that you would be talking with something else that you love or that you're super familiar with. And then my last tip is just that another misconception about improvisation is that people who are improvising are just pulling things completely out of thin air, things that they had never thought of or never seen or never heard of before, and that there's kind of no basis that they're drawing from to put these things in the world. It's just coming purely out of that singular moment. And sometimes that's the case, but more often than not, they're kind of drawing on influences that they've already had or ideas that they've already had. So my last tip for improvisation would just be to build a little backlog of things that you can drop in at a moment's notice. Come up with a couple NPCs before a session. And maybe you don't have to decide where they're going to be in the session, even if the party just asks, like, hey, is there a person here we can talk to? Have an NPC that you've already written and just drop them into the world right there. And that's improvisation. Like, you didn't know you were going to put that person in that place. So just because you already kind of knew a personality and a look that they had doesn't necessarily mean that you're not improvising. So it's totally okay to prepare elements ahead of time so that if you need something in a pinch, you need an NPC or an encounter or a place that you can draw from, you can just kind of take something that you've already written that has no place in the world and just drop it in that moment. And it makes it so much easier to kind of bridge those smooth transitions and make it seem like you've pulled something amazing out of nowhere, when in reality, you've just kind of dropped something that you've already written and drawn off something that you've already created. To drop it in, and because you didn't plan for it to be there, that is improvisation. And people who say that it's not, that's not the case. So yeah, those would be kind of my big picture tips.
So I think that that demystification of improv goes a very long way, because that's the idea, is especially when you're playing a role-playing game, every decision you make is effectively improvisation. It's unlikely that because you don't know what everyone else is going to do or what the GM is going to throw at you, that you sit down and go, okay, well, in the first fight, I'm going to go ahead and do fireball, and then I'm going to hit him with my sword, and then I'm going to everything. You're all making those decisions. So it's just important to realize that there's not necessarily a wrong answer when you're improvising. There is a little bit of a shared context you need to keep in mind. Obviously, if you say there's, a flying ship in a fantasy world, that's not going to work. But even in some more ridiculous, flowy kind of improvisational games, the GM might come up with a way to go, oh, well, it is, or it's an illusion, or it could even still work. It's difficult to go wrong, especially when you're playing your own character or when you're GMing a specific NPC or something. You can usually come up with a reason, especially after the fact, that an NPC would have done something or that your character would have said something, even if maybe it didn't entirely fit or it wasn't exactly what you wanted. It's almost a little more real then. You said something and you thought, oh, maybe I didn't want to say that, but that's kind of a good thing. You were almost literally your character in that moment, where you bridged that gap between you and whoever it was that you're playing, and you were improvising just as though you would have been in real life if you were talking to your friend or doing something else. Deciding where to eat was another good example. So I think as soon as you realize that it's not some mystical process, like you said, Jeff, you begin to simply be more comfortable with it, and it helps you realize that it's simply making decisions from a slightly different viewpoint, not necessarily, racking your brain or coming up with stuff on the fly. You're just kind of being. You just have a few extra things to consider.
So when it comes to D&D improv, here's one that it's like, okay, I'm going to describe something to you, and then I'm going to tell you the trick. A tall, broad-shouldered figure stands before you. She has scaled armor that almost has a rippled, sort of like light blue effect. She has this strange symbol on her chest, and in her right hand is a tower shield that's crested in gold with these strange glyphs and these patterns. Her long blonde hair comes out from behind a helm that's strapped at the chin. And as she approaches you, she says, "What's your business here?" So I basically just reskinned Captain America as a woman and described her fantasy, but because you don't see a picture of Captain America, right? You're thinking something totally different reference point. So my first thing is just describe stuff that you're very comfortable with. And this plays off of, Jeff, what you said, where it's like, if I describe to you Doctor Doom, but don't tell you it's Doctor Doom, you're going to imagine a totally different mask and a totally different cloak. So that's one thing. It's like, you can improvise stuff that already exists and people run it through their own filter, and now it's this totally new bad person. So that's one thing. The second thing is, and this is like a super fun way to deflect, ask a guided question. Make it about the player rather than feeling like, oh, what am I going to do? Say, an NPC is walking by and they notice your sword. What would they notice? Now they get to talk about their cool sword or whatever is the character's love or thing that they're always proud of or describing, or and that is a cool way to say, oh, they definitely noticed the crest because it's my father's crest. And they're doing the work now. So by asking a guided question that kind of points to them being the players, and they get to talk about themselves, trust me, they'll take that and run with it. So that's number 2. And then the third thing would be, and this plays off of what James and Jeff both said, have 3 incidentals locked and loaded. Well, how do I do that? What do I do? Go to Pinterest. You're looking for a person, a place, and a thing. So just type in Pinterest, fantasy location. And go nuts. Pinterest is crazy. So you can do like fantasy underwater prison, whatever. And then do a person, and then do a thing. And then you just take those, put them on your phone, have them in a folder, whatever, and then just come up with one like sort of secret for each one of those things. And those are my incidentals. So that if we come to a place and all of a sudden the players go crazy and they're gravitating towards something that I never imagined they'd gravitate toward, like I offhandedly mentioned that there were some boxes, so now they think that the world's treasure is in these boxes. I can then make the thing that I pulled, oh, hey, look what you found. It's a sword with a lion's pommel, lion's head pommel and blah, blah, blah. So those are my kind of things where if I'm going into a game and I can do those 3 things, I can't fail.
So those are our big picture tips on improv, just some sort of starter points to get you in the right direction. Now, there's a lot that we could say on improv that we didn't cover directly right here. So if you do want to hear us talk a little bit more about improv, getting into some deeper dives and kind of talking about some of the more nitty gritty parts of improvisation, we've recorded a longer form video as well of us just kind of talking through everything a little bit deeper. So check that out if you are interested. But yeah, as far as improvisation in general goes, just keep in mind that you're always improvising and that it's okay to have sort of things prepared to bring into the game ahead of time. And even if you don't know exactly where you're going to put them, down to the detail, being prepared and understanding that it's all kind of part of the process and that there's no pressure to get it exactly right the first time. That's all totally okay. And if you use those tips and tricks, it'll make your improvisation a lot more smooth and a lot more easy on you, which is the more important part. That you'll kind of have the confidence that you need to kind of go into the game and make sure that you have something ready no matter what the players do.
So we are Tabletop Terrors. We're all about fun, creativity, and tabletop games. So if you like any of those three things, this is the place for you. Consider subscribing if you want to see more videos like this. And be sure to like this video. Now, what I want to see in the comments are, what is your biggest question about improv that we didn't answer? And for those of you who have improvised before, what's that improv moment that you absolutely just did an awesome job on, surprising even yourself? I want to hear, and we want to hear about that awesome, mind-blowing moment.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything that you undertake.
Sláinte.
Sláinte.
Sláinte.